What we have in front of us here is the 110 perks of the last spell as of the Dwarves of Runenberg DLC. That DLC added almost 30 new perks, but I have changed my opinion on a lot of the perks that existed before the DLC was released as well. So we have a lot to talk about here, and we are going to talk about it in the form of a tier list, taking every one of these perks and painstakingly slotting them into one of the 5 categories S through F of this tier list. So if that sounds like something you're into, let's jump on in. But before we get started, it's almost tradition on this channel for us to do a bit of a disclaimer before we dive into any tier list. The disclaimer is simple. Tier lists are probably not the best way to think about the game. The games that we play are complicated and nuanced, and what that means is that the decisions that you make are based on the specific situation of the game. So you shouldn't be thinking about A is better than B, and B is better than C, and C is better than D, because that just isn't true. In some cases, a perk may be game-changingly powerful. In other cases, it may not. Historically, I addressed this a little bit by adding a situational column or row, in this case, to the tier list. Basically, it was a place for me to put things that I felt were too niche, but when they hit really hard. But I realize now that I think that's a bit of a cop-out. The purpose of a tier list is to make difficult decisions in order to force us to be critical and think critically about the thing that we are tier listing. So to that end, I now will be baking the situationality of the things that I am tier listing into their overall ranking. If something is particularly hard to enable, that just makes it a little worse than something that is always amazing. So with that in mind, let's dive into this absolute mountain of perks that we have to deal with. And the place to begin is with Fatality. Fatality just allows you to execute low health creatures. And the way that I think about Fatality is pretty straightforward. Early game, the game is relatively balanced, and you're going to have a lot of creatures that you almost kill. A lot of monsters will be on like 5 hit points or something like that in the early nights, because the developer knows how much power your heroes have, they know how many hit points the enemy has, and they can balance them relatively well. As you start to scale up in the late game, you're going to be wildly overkilling enemies, and as a result, Fatality is going to lose a lot of value. So there's some value for Fatality early game, and then it drops off pretty substantially in the late game. The other issue with Fatality is that it's melee range only, so you need a fair amount of movement to be able to run around and melee Fatality all the things that you need to. So to that end, the abundance of movement in the early game, or the lack of abundance of movement in the early game, coupled with Fatality needing to be melee range, makes it kind of a tough perk to recommend, because early game you're lacking the mobility to be able to use it, and then late game when you have the mobility, you're overkilling things and you're not benefiting as much from it. So overall, I think I put Fatality firmly in the C rank. I think it's okay. It's not a bad perk, but there's almost always a better perk that you could be taking. Sprint is potentially one of those perks that you could be taking. Sprint is every turn, twice per turn, you can give up 10 health to get 3 movement. So a total of 20 health for 6 movement. This is an insane amount of movement that is useful throughout the entire duration of the game, because this is not an increase in your maximum movement. Your movement is capped at 17. I believe. This is the ability to get back 3 movement at some point during your turn. So you can hit the sprint button twice per turn and get back 6 movement. This is potentially doubling the mobility of a hero that has 6 base movement, but then later on in the game, if you have some type of health regen, this is potentially an insane amount of movement over the course of an entire night or over the course of an entire game. As far as tier 1 perks go, sprint is pretty exceptional. So I'm going to put it right there up at the top of A tier as one of those things where on a Blood Mage, this is a no-brainer because they have lots of regen to get back the health, but on almost any hero, the amount of health loss that you are potentially preventing by being able to move your hero out of harm's way is unprecedented. Next, we have mana growth. And mana growth and the way that I am thinking about mana these days has changed a bit from the last time I did a perk tier list, I believe. And the reason for that is historically, I thought about mana regen as the kind of king of the castle. I liked daily mana regen because it got me back mana. I really liked things that allowed me to recoup mana in the moment or over the course of things. And I didn't use mana wells nearly as much as I do now. I think mana wells are a very powerful building. If I was doing a tier list, I think mana wells would be very high on the building tier list. And the reason is because they provide you mana regen targeted where you need it. So if one hero is sipping mana, you don't have to worry about them, you know, like they're a stun hero or something like that. They can use mana when they need to, and they'll probably regen it over the course of a night or over the course of a couple nights. But having a larger mana pool comes with a couple of things. One, it plays well with magic fuel, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But two, it just gives you the ability, especially on the later nights, if you've been relatively conservative in your mana use, on say the final night, you can go absolutely ham. If you have like 100 mana, you can just cast and cast and cast, and you'll never run out of mana. So to that end, I think mana growth and the amount of mana that it gives, it's 6 plus 3 for every level. That's potentially a lot of mana that you're getting from this, which can be converted into damage, but also just converted into damage because your mana skills are the most effective. Next up, we have Harvester. And I am pretty sure, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that Harvester might have been the first S tier perk that I handed out. Now, the last time I did a perk tier list, it might have been before Harvester had the cap of not being able to regenerate more than 25% of your mana, but I'm actually not sure about that. I think I still rated it quite highly even with that cap, and my tune has changed a bit. I think Harvester is still okay, but as far as like sustain perks for mana go, I don't think it's particularly good. And the reason that I say that is that it doesn't really offset a small mana pool. If you don't have a large mana pool, you're not getting a lot of value out of this. Like let's say, you know, hypothetically your hero has a 40 mana pool. They're going to be getting a max of 10 mana regen out of this. And 40s, I would say, is pretty average for a hero. It's a little on the low side. So because you need a larger mana pool, and there aren't that many ways to get a larger mana pool other than spending precious primary level ups, I think that Harvester is a bit hamstrung, and I actually think that it's going to drop down to somewhere in the bottom of C. It's still okay. There's almost always something that I would rather take than Harvester, and I think that may come as a surprise to some, but I would at this point much rather have a mana well and a large mana pool that I'm trying to refill through like benedictions, etc., than have more daily mana regen, especially that is keyed off of being a percentage of my overall mana. Bloodthirst, on the other hand, I think I'm going to give slightly higher marks to. So Bloodthirst is just the Blood Mage version of Harvester, and it basically does the same thing. It gives you 3 daily health regen, up to 20% of your health, and daily health regen at least has some semblance of synergy. And what I mean by that is there is nothing that benefits you in getting more daily mana regen, except having more daily mana regen and being able to cast spells more liberally. Whereas at least with Bloodthirst, you're potentially getting some armor out of it if you have Coagulation. Where this gets a little tricky is that I think that the thing that holds Bloodthirst back is that the best way to get a large health pool, which by extension will lead to being able to get a lot of daily health regen, is organic armor. But then organic armor takes the health regen converting into armor, converting into then overall health pool, and it kind of removes the resilience that you would have gotten out of it. So Bloodthirst to me is best on a Blood Mage that is not going organic armor, but potentially still has Bodybuilder, and well, actually Bodybuilder doesn't really matter, but has Coagulation and requires some survivability from armor. So to that end, I think that it has slightly more synergy than Harvester, but I still think it's pretty lackluster as far as perks go. That moves us on to Perseverance, and I think I was pretty harsh on Perseverance previously because I think that the math doesn't work out well in its favor. So basically every 2 attacks that you miss with, you will get back 1 AP. So in the absolute best case scenario, you might be able to use quick reload in order to get 2 free actions with an offhand and get back 1 AP from this. But in most cases, you're going to spend a minimum of 2 AP and you will get back 1 AP. That's not a good return. And then you will get accuracy, which is not helping out either. The only place where Perseverance makes sense to me is if you are running it with, say, Shower of Blows, which is going to force a certain number of misses, and it helps you to mitigate basically 50% of those misses. So in that case, I think Perseverance is okay. it's slightly better than I think I thought about it previously because there's slightly more value to missing. There's also Collateral Damage, which we tried very hard to do a build with yesterday, but it didn't necessarily pan out. So Perseverance, I think it's okay. It lives in B tier from my perspective because you are getting a little bit of AP back if you are missing, but there are really no builds that are built towards missing. So I don't think that it has a lot of value, except maybe in the context of mitigating Shower of Blows, which I think is okay, and we'll talk about later. Next up, we have Steady Aim. If your hero hasn't moved, gain 10 accuracy and 1 skill range. I don't really like Steady Aim. The reason is that it creates this kind of weird dynamic. So first of all, I think watchtowers are bad. So with a few very limited exceptions, I think that watchtowers rarely ever work, and Steady Aim is kind of like the watchtower perk. The problem with Steady Aim is if you decide that you have to move, which is probably not that uncommon, if you decide that you have to move, then you immediately lose the skill range as soon as you move. And what that means is your first point of movement after you move has no net effect on your overall scope of influence. You can still shoot the same tiles after you move 1 tile, which means that it kind of is only useful if you can really stay stationary for, say, the entire turn. And I think that that's just generally unrealistic. I don't think you're going to be doing it. I don't think you should build heroes with that as an expectation, unless you're doing a no movement challenge. I guess in that case, maybe. But funny. I wonder if anyone would do that. I did. But yeah, so overall, I think that it's not great. I'm going to put it down here maybe just above Harvester and Bloodthirst because, I mean, 10 accuracy and 1 skill range early in certain circumstances could be okay, but, you know, C tier are not things that I'm highly recommending. Next up, we have Cherry Picking. When attacking an isolated unit, get 40% reliability. I have a hard time caring about reliability. This is a common theme that you will know from basically every video that I've ever done. I've done a lot of math on it. The TLDR on reliability is that reliability is a percentage of the difference between your min and max damage. That is a much, much smaller number than I think people think it is. Even with the least reliable weapons like your great axes and your tomes, reliability is not moving the needle nearly as much as basically anything else. So is cherry picking like actively bad? No. I'm going to put it at the bottom of C tier because all it offers is reliability, and I generally think that reliability is not that terribly useful. We move on to back protection. Whenever a hero is next to a stationary thing, they gain 25 armor plus 5 for each level of the hero. This can provide a lot of armor, but I generally don't want a lot of armor. And if I want armor, I probably want armor that is evergreen, because the issue with needing to retreat into a particular position is sometimes you're just not going to have one within range. You're going to have to run out to get a Dryad on Glenwall, and you're just not going to be able to make it back to a tree or something like that. So I think back protection is tough to utilize. It's just not terribly impactful. As far as a tier 1 perk goes, it's not the worst thing in the world, but there's some ones that I would absolutely pick before it. I think I'm going to put it above Fatality. It's not quite going to crack into B tier for me, but I think it is okay. Next up, we have Stunning. It's evergreen, 15% stun for stun heroes, which I think is there are several very strong stun builds. Stun is a very powerful build. I really like this. You pick it up and it allows you to stun more effectively. It is more than a full secondary level up. So I think that it's good. It's something that I am excited to see on the debuff tree. So I drop it firmly into A tier, and I don't think there's a lot to talk about here. More stun is good. Septic Shock. So Septic Shock is the kind of perk that you can build a build around. And what I mean by that is that basically the way that it works is every time you poison an enemy that is already poisoned, you have a 50% chance to stun them, which is not an insignificant percentage to stun. I have stunned plenty of bulkies and twisted with Septic Shock, potentially. The thing that makes Septic Shock very interesting, though, is the way that Septic Shock interfaces with multiple durations of poison. So if you have an enemy and it is poisoned by 2 things that have different durations, those 2 poisons show up as different line items on the debuffs list of the enemy. And if you then give that enemy contagion and kill it, the 2 poisons will transfer to the new enemy. And because the one poison is applied and then the other one is, that can trigger Septic Shock. So you can get essentially free stuns out of nowhere if you're passing around more than 1 poison, which is very easy to do with a lot of the poison builds. So Septic Shock, to me, fits firmly in S tier. I think it is a build around. It is part of my poison multi-hit build. It is exceptionally powerful because once you start creating stuns with some poison, passing them around with contamination and contagion, you are very happy with where you have landed. So Septic Shock, excellent. Cheer. Okay, this is going to be a divisive one, and the simple reason for that is that I don't like cheer because I forget that it exists all the time. I am not great at remembering to do things at the beginning of turns for the remainder of turns. The same goes for damage potions, for the new crit Pilsner beer. All of these things, I just don't remember them until I get to the end of the turn, and they are best utilized at the beginning of the turn. Cheer has synergy with, say, Bless, right? You can get 30% damage basically for free if you also have Blessing at, in the later parts of a run. And 15% damage potentially handles those breakpoints that we were talking about before. So I am going to soften my stance on Cheer, and I am going to put it firmly in the B tier. I will put it above Perseverance as well. How kind of me. And I do that simply because it is free real estate. I can't complain about Cheer. I just have a hard time remembering to use it. That moves on to Coagulation. I think Coagulation I put in the situational column, and it really didn't deserve it. It is just nice. Coagulation is a good perk because it takes a stat that you can get from a variety of sources, gear, etc., and it converts it into something that is kind of like universally useful. A little bit of ablative HP, aka armor. So I like Coagulation a lot more than I think I have previously, and to that end, because it is free, because it interfaces well with Bloodthirst, etc., I'm going to put it up here, maybe just below Stunning. I really like Stunning, but I think that Coagulation is firmly in A tier. I am always surprised by how much survivability my heroes can get just from taking it. And dwarves have extra daily health regen, which means dwarves benefit from this kind of asymmetrically valuably. That moves us on to Leapfrog. So Leapfrog is basically just the replacement for Jump Over, and it makes it have an additional range and also cost 1 less mana to use. Really, really nice skill, basically a requirement on Elderlicht. I know the discussions of Leapfrog are often discussions of religious import. And what I mean by that is just that people are very, very strong with their opinions surrounding Leapfrog. Some people love it, some people swear by it, some people will not run a run without the omen that gives Leapfrog and now a really tossable fellow to all of their heroes. I am not in that camp. I think that Leapfrog is strong. I generally think that I personally prefer Sprint over Leapfrog. Do I? I don't know. I think they're very comparable. I'm going to put it top of A. It's not going to slip into S tier for me, but I do think I like it slightly more than Sprint because with the right targets, with the right opportunities to jump over things, I think you can do a lot of good with it. And actually, now that I think about it, there is one issue, which is that sometimes jump over is weird. Sometimes you can't jump over a Ballista, or there's certain things that you can't jump over a lit soul vessel, etc., that are really annoying quirks of leap over or leapfrog or jump over, all of the above, that make it a little annoying. And I think that the evergreen ability to just regenerate movement is, to me, slightly preferable over Leapfrog, except maybe on Elderlicht. So that situational bump down, I think it's just slightly less powerful. Moving on to Potion Throw. Potion Throw I like mostly for the extra bag slot more than anything else. It and Overload both give you 1 additional bag slot, which gives you a lot of flexibility to pick up an extra scroll, an extra potion, etc. I think that Bag slots, especially on blood mages, are something that I've been very interested about lately. I think that blood mages benefit a huge amount from scrolls, and having additional slots for scrolls can be really useful. I also think that bag slots are hugely beneficial because you can toss a teleport scroll or something like that in. So I think for me, potion throw is good, but it does suffer a little bit from that situationality that to me puts it in kind of like high B tier. I think overload is the potion skill that's gonna eke into the A tier category, but we'll get to that in a second. Next we have quick reload. So quick reload, actually I should go back for 1 second before we go to quick reload. The 15 range on potions, it's fine. It doesn't make a huge difference to me. It's kind of nice once in a while to have, but I don't think that you can do full support heroes. So, you know, the idea of having a hero that's like cheering and buffing and sending potions every which way, it can sometimes be good. B tier, but doesn't go beyond that. Now we move on to quick reload. So quick reload is a very unique perk. It gives you an additional charge on all of your weapons and your offhand. What this potentially means is in kind of the optimal of optimal situations, you could potentially be getting 1 quick shot on a hand crossbow, 1 additional slow death, 1 additional blaze, and a 2nd quick shot from an offhand crossbow. That is insane that you can do that not once per night, but 3 times per night is pretty freaking fantastic, making it an S tier. Now, you will know if you have watched any of my runs that I sometimes have a bit of too good to use syndrome when it comes to quick reload. What I mean by that is that sometimes I'll get to the end of a night and I'll still have all my quick reloads available. The thing is when you really need them, it is so insanely flexible. You quick reload on a wand when you need to do a transfer and move someone out of harm's way that you accidentally overextended. You can use it to get that extra kill that you needed. You can use it for an extra wind walk or an extra shot on a momentum hero. It is so diversely applicable. There's basically not a build that I think doesn't benefit from quick reload. Let's move on to Really Tossable Fellow. So Really Tossable Fellow is the equivalent of Leapfrog for dwarves. It is, in my opinion, significantly more impactful than the human version. And the reason for that is that you are able to throw them further, but mostly you can throw them while being 4 blocks away. The difference between 2 blocks away and 4 blocks away might as well be like the Pacific Ocean. It is so incredibly massive. You can throw dwarves from so far away if you have Really Tossable Fellow on the dwarf that you are tossing. So I really love it. Tossing dwarves is fun. Just full stop. The ability to kind of like leapfrog them over one another, etc., is terribly helpful. I am always surprised by how much mobility you get from tossing. And I am almost in the camp of giving them a firm S tier ranking, but I think they live in this like little mobility pocket at the top of A tier. I think that's a comfortable place. I do think it is better than Leapfrog. Body Count Contest. I don't believe this has been fixed. I think it's broken at the moment. The way that it is supposed to work is if you have 2 heroes on the same side within 12 tiles of each other, the hero that has Body Count Contest will get 20 extra XP for the killing blow on an enemy. Every hero has 2 pools of experience they get at the end of a night. They get experience for every enemy that they killed, and they get the experience that is the shared pool of experience that everyone gets. This is supposed to increase the amount of experience they are getting from their kills by 20%. I think that it might work exactly the opposite of the way that it's supposed to work. But at the end of the day, let's assume that it works the way that it's supposed to work. And I give Body Count Contest, like it's the tier 1 XP perk. We don't mind that. I think that I put it firmly in like the B camp. I might take Potion Throw over it. It kind of depends. XP is good. Getting some XP early is solid. 20% XP is nothing to sneeze at. That is, of course, also a dwarf-only perk, which is also true of Jolly Drinker. So Jolly Drinker is when you use a potion, you also gain a regen of 2 movement points. It kind of turns all potions into mediocre movement potions also that can't be doled out on someone else. It is nice because dwarfs need a bit of additional movement because they generally start out with a little bit less movement. But potions are not that abundant. Like when you compare Jolly Drinker to Sprint for a second. So first of all, Sprint for 10 HP, you are getting an additional movement and you can use it twice every turn, as opposed to Jolly Drinker, which with like, even with like 4 potions of like level 5 potions, you're still limited on how many times you can use it. And that's a really extreme example. Early game, maybe you have 2 or 3 uses of a potion, maybe 4 uses of a potion. So to that end, I think Jolly Drinker is significantly worse than the other mobility perks that we've been talking about, to the point where I'm going to put it down here. There's very few cases where I think I would use Jolly Drinker. I don't think that it's that great. I don't think that the alchemist archetype, where you have like someone who has tons of potions that they're doling out to lots of people and they're running around giving everyone what they need, it doesn't really exist. And it would need to for me to get excited about this. And I can't understand why it doesn't give more movement. I think it could give 4 movement and it would still be perfectly balanced. I think I think drinking a potion could refill your movement, and it probably would be really good, but not like broken good. So I don't know, take that for what you will. In its current form, it's not really moving the needle. Bodybuilder. Okay, so in this new meta of Runenberg, we have 2 kind of archetypes for defensive heroes. We have the like bodybuilder blood mage, maybe with organic armor and vampire, and then we have like the defensive hedgehog style build that I've been thinking about. So this fits firmly into the big health pool camp. And the thing that I will say is that you can get a lot of physical damage off of bodybuilder. Like basically bodybuilder by itself, if you get a hero to 1000 HP, which with organic armor is a very reasonable goal, you will get nearly all of the physical damage that you need to cap at 200%, which is a big deal. That's potentially a lot of damage. And for defensive heroes in general, you're generally getting a fair amount of damage from bodybuilder. I think it's a very strong perk. And I think as a result, I put bodybuilder kind of up here, maybe like above coagulation, like somewhere in A tier. Not that it's directly competing with coagulation, but it's good without being like unbelievably good. I think bodybuilder is very strong, and it is competing with Spiky Counter. Now, Spiky Counter is a tricky one for me because I currently have a real thing for these hedgehog builds. I think they're super fun. The issue with Spiky Counter is that the thing that I love about Spiky Counter is the way that it interfaces with Berserk style builds. So Berserk, if you're unfamiliar, we'll talk about it much later on. It's a tier 5 perk. But Berserk is every time you get hit or you are attacked, you gain a damage modifier. And so that plus Spiky Counter encourages you to just get pummeled on, coupled with the War Shield, and you're getting like tons of damage. It's really nice. I really like this build. But Spiky Counter itself is kind of like the marginal aspect of that build. You can do that build without Spiky Counter and still be very happy with the results. And the reason is that Spiky Counter has huge fluctuations in its applicability. In the worst case scenario, in a wave that has no ranged enemies, Spiky Counter is killing 4 enemies a turn, which is insignificant in the grand scheme of like stronger builds that are killing, you know, like 40 enemies a turn, you know, without like breaking a sweat type of thing. Now, in the best case scenario, right, you have a wave that is all archers and they all surround you and you're just getting, you know, they're exploding themselves every time they attack. Spiky Counter is unbelievably powerful, but it is so wave dependent that I can't give it as high marks as I wish I could. I think I'm going to put it in B tier. That's definitely an improvement, I think, over when I have previously discussed it, but the issue with it is just that on the right waves, it's great. When you got bounty hunters, even when you have hoppers to a certain extent, archers, etc., it's fantastic, but then it falls off pretty radically if you have low enemy density or if you don't have the ability to get people out there. Also, you know, rose-colored glasses, it often gets paired with Berserk, and Berserk is insane. So moving on, we have Magic Fuel. Magic Fuel is generally just like a nice chunk of of additional damage. It's basically a freebie. It is your current mana. So it has this kind of like attenuating effect where all of a sudden, you start to spend some mana and your damage goes down moderately. I don't think that's a huge deal. It's just nice to get a little extra damage. It plays super well with the previous tier's mana growth as something that you can just kind of like, grab mana growth, grab this, and you're going to be sitting on like maybe 20% increased damage or something like that for the cost of a tier 1 perk. So I like it. I'm going to put it somewhere up here in like bottom of A tier. I don't think it's not, like blowing the barn doors off or anything like that, but it's good. It's one that I grab relatively frequently. If I can couple mana growth with this, I'm generally pretty happy. Then we have Sanguine Fuel. So like I said before, unlike with mana growth, Sanguine Fuel has kind of like a build and a synergy coupled with it. There are some big health builds. And the thing that's really cool if you have Bodybuilder and you have Sanguine Fuel is when you take health, you are getting a primary damage increase and you are getting a physical damage increase, which couple together kind of nicely and make Sanguine Fuel for blood mages that are going that high health vampire bodybuilder type of route pretty freaking strong, to the point where I'm going to put it just above Bodybuilder. They both live in that category of, I think there's a lot of very effective builds you can do in that space. Then we have critical runes. So every 10% of missing mana plus 4% critical. As we've discussed, I don't like to run low mana builds. The issue that I see here is that you're potentially getting up to a 40% crit increase, which is pretty impressive. But the cost of that is basically the cost of not having the access to your mana using abilities, which are very strong abilities. Mana using abilities are exceptionally powerful abilities. And so as a result, critical runes has always felt like a bit of a dud for me, because I don't want to be low on mana. And if I'm not low on mana, I'm getting some marginal amount of crit out of it. And the bigger issue, I think, is as I'm going into the final nights, I want to make sure that I'm topping up my mana. So as I do that and I go into the final night, I want to be full mana so I can cast and I can cast and I can cast. And by the time this starts to come online, it's pitting two things that I don't want to be mutually exclusive against each other. I want to have high crit and I want to have lots of mana to spend to take advantage of that crit. And to me, this doesn't do that. And so from a design space, I put it like somewhere down here, like bottom of C tier. It's not actively bad. I almost never take it. The Blood Mage equivalent of that is Critical Carvings, which is a 2% critical for every 5% missing health. Again, it kind of fits in the same category. There is a world of like the Warcry low health dwarven hero, but I don't think Critical Carvings fits very well into that camp. Maybe it's okay, actually. I will take this back a little bit. I'm gonna run that back just a touch and say that I do think that there are heroes that I have very successfully built with Warcry that are distributing like 30% damage plus 2 turns in a row with Blessing. They're getting up to like 60 damage. And having a bunch of free crit coming from Critical Carvings on that hero probably wouldn't be bad. It would mean that I could invest more heavily in health as a primary stat and get the crit kind of on the back end, which is nice. So to that end, I am going to put it up here. It's not gonna eclipse Spiky Counter, but it's good. It's in the B tier. It's fine. For the right Blood Mage, I think it can be particularly useful. Next, we have Mark. Mark debuffs the dodge of a given target by 20%. It has no scaling. I wish it had a little bit of scaling. But the thing that Mark does that is exceptionally useful is it allows you to apply a debuff for free. So for your Sadist heroes, if you are running Sadist on a hero, your goal is to get some type of debuff, some type of poison, and some type of contagion, and then maybe stun. And you want to get those 4 debuffs on an enemy for as cheap as possible, and then use some mechanism to spread them as much as you possibly can, so that you're getting 4% opportunism every single time one of those spreads. Mark is an insanely good enabler. It also helps you in the early game. If you have a hero that is low on accuracy, you can occasionally use it to secure a kill that would otherwise be hard to, but it's primarily about the opportunism synergy, but I think opportunism is very strong. And so as a result, I think I'm going to put it down here in like the coagulation stun space as like it's A tier because it has so much synergy. It enables you to do some good things with it. And I like that. Then we have Third Eye. So Third Eye had a real glow up on a recent run that I did, specifically the no movement run, where I was really fighting line of sight kind of perpetually, and having Third Eye on a bunch of heroes helped out a lot. Vision is powerful, and especially with heroes like multi-hit heroes who can hit 2 enemies every other attack and basically trigger Third Eye half of the time. It's really nice to have vision half of the time. And I think that Third Eye is sleeper very, very good. It doesn't really enable any builds. It doesn't really give you a huge benefit, but the fact that every once in a while you can like transfer across your entire base with high skill range is nothing to sleep on. And I'm going to put it like it almost is A tier for me, but I think I wanna bring it down just a notch because it's not something that I take too frequently, and it doesn't really. It has very stiff competition at tier 2, I will say. Then we have First Blood. So this is full health enemies you have 15% crit against. I like First Blood. I do. The thing that I struggle with First Blood is most of the time the heroes that I'm really pushing hard to get crit on go over cap because of First Blood, because I just stopped thinking about it at some point. At some point, I'm like, I don't want to have to think about this. I want to have 100% crit. If I'm going to be killing a boss, I don't want to have 100% crit on the first hit on the boss and then 85% crit on the remainder. So this is mostly good early game. And then late game, I feel like I want the crit in a more reliable fashion. Generally speaking, across this entire tier list, you will probably notice that I have a tendency to value evergreen things over things that have like situational aspects to them. Because situational aspects, situational, like sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off. We'll talk about like a shark later, where it's only enemies that are wounded. I would rather my hero be strong against every enemy and similarly strong against every enemy than have a huge power spike against specific enemies with specific things enabled on them. So to that end, I think this is a bit of a surprise to me, but I think I'm going to put it under Third Eye in B tier. I think I overvalue it in my current play, but I think that that's where it probably belongs. Defensive Training. Okay, so enemies killed by defenses now give bonus XP to this hero as if they were the killer. Here's the thing about Defensive Training. If you are at all new to the game, if you're playing using Ballistas, you're doing the Ball of Death strategy, Ballistas get a lot of kills. And by default, at the beginning of a run, your Ballistas become an XP suck. Right? They are killing things that your heroes could have killed. And we talked about the 2 pools of hero experience prior, but normally, if the Ballista gets the kill, no one gets the kill XP, and that XP is essentially wasted. And the first hero you take Defensive Training on, that XP is no longer wasted. But where it gets crazy is if you have 6 heroes with Defensive Training, now every time your Ballistas get a kill, all 6 of your heroes get credit for that kill. That is incredibly powerful for runs where you're pushing really hard on like leveling up your heroes. This is an amazing potential 6x, 5x, 3x increase in your overall XP if you're smart about letting the Ballistas get the kill. And to that end, it lives in A tier. Defensive Training is exceptionally strong. Next up, we move on to Contamination. Now, I always confuse Contamination and Contagion. Now that they're here in front of me looking at them, I can remember that Contamination is the thing that you put on people. Nope, I got it wrong already. Contagion is the thing that you put on people, and Contamination is the action by which you apply it. Contagion is unique in this game. It is, in my opinion, the best designed mechanic in the entire game because it is so unique. This idea of debuffing things and then spreading that debuff to 2 adjacent enemies, it just, they hit a home run with the design of this ability, and it is so powerful. As we discussed before, it is the cornerstone of every Sadist build. It is insanely good for poison builds because you apply poison to one enemy. Like let's say you do a bees and you get a whole line of enemies poisoned. You put contagion on the first one, and then every time you kill an enemy down that chain, you're doubling the amount of poison that you're passing. It's out of control. You do that in a cluster of enemies, and those enemies happen to have stun, like poison multi-hit heroes. Bonkers. Contagion is easy S tier. No ifs, ands, or doubts about it. It goes at the absolute top. Contagion is useful for so many builds. I'm always excited when I get the debuff tree. That moves on to Poisonous. This is at the end of hero's turn in a 3-tile radius, a little diamond around the hero. That's the way that 3 range looks. You apply 40 poison to all enemies. We had a great conversation that actually changed the way that I think about Poisonous in a run that I did recently where I took Poisonous on a hero, mostly as a meme. So Poisonous, the way that it works is the poison is applied at the end of the hero's turn. And then when the enemy turn starts, that poison immediately ticks on those enemies. And if they were going to cause panic and they die, they do not cause panic anymore. So the way to think about Poisonous is it is very valid to say that it is an area effect execute. So just like Fatality, it's going to do essentially the same thing. Any enemies that are low on health around your hero, when Poisonous procs, they will die and you will not gain panic from them. So to that end, I am going to give Poisonous a much higher rating than I thought I normally would. I'm not going to put it above Spiky Counter because I think that it's harder to utilize because standing in the thick of things is difficult, and getting a bunch of enemies near death so that you can then let Poisonous tick on them, it's a bit of a dance. I actually think to that end, I'm keeping it in B tier, but I'm gonna let it move over towards that lower edge of B tier. It's better than I thought it was. The builds around it still kind of suck. Unfortunately, that's just, in my opinion, the reality of the situation. Is making Poisonous like a full cornerstone of a build is really, really difficult because the place you want to be killing enemies is in the Haven, and using Poisonous in the Haven is generally a little slow. 40 poison doesn't scale up that incredibly well, even when you're at 500% poison. It's a tricky one. You generally need some other damage. You also can't use it with Epidemic. It gets very awkward there. So on and so forth. Avid Learner, evergreen 25% XP gain. We like it. We almost always take it when we have the option. Where do you end up? And I really like it at top of A tier. Not going to put it in S tier. Doesn't really do anything for me there, but it's a great grab. 25% XP is potentially an extra level. An extra level is potentially an extra multi-hit. It's potentially an extra AP. It's potentially both of those. It's potentially a lot of really incredible things that can benefit a hero. XP is very powerful in the last spell. Moving on up. Crippling Punch. So I have done punch-only runs. I know the power of Crippling Punch. Crippling Punch is a significant upgrade to Punch. And Punch can be used an unlimited number of times, so it has some value to it. That value is kind of nominal, though. There are really no builds that hinge around Crippling Punch as like the cornerstone. I could see maybe taking it on like a Bodybuilder Blood Mage and just hitting really hard with it. I have some heroes in the past that have hit really, really hard with punches, like into the thousands. But it's still melee range, and the snare isn't that particularly useful. So to that end, I think it lives somewhere up at the top of C tier. It has like, there's some limited use, but I'm not going to be taking it on basically any build. I hope that someday there is a Crippling Punch build that you can do, but that day is not today. Glass Cannon. So how does Glass Cannon apply to its counterpart, whose name I have already forgotten, which is First Blood. So they both give 15% crit. This one comes at a cost of health, and it is evergreen other than that. You lose some health, you gain some critical. I'm a big proponent of glass cannon type builds. I think they are exceptionally strong, and crit is one of those things that you're always looking for. And 15% crit is a non-insignificant, that's more than a blue level up of crit. It does come with the downside of 60 health, but you can offset that. You can offset that quite easily through gear. There's lots of gear that comes with a fair amount of health. You can also offset it by just taking a single level up of health, and you get nearly all of that health back. So to that end, it lives up here. I really like crit. There are a lot of crit builds that we'll talk about that kind of come in the second half of the perk tree that make crit incredibly powerful and incredibly useful. Moving on, we have Nimbleness. 15% dodge and 2 move as long as you aren't wounded. I hate when I get wounded and I have Nimbleness. As you may know, my perspective is that dodge is a pretty starkly unreliable statistic. The fact that it caps at 95 means that you can never become kind of untouchable with it. A lot of the most terrifying abilities that enemies have, Boomer's Explosions, Twisted's Death Rays, are also undodgeable. And as soon as you get hit by one of those, Nimbleness goes out the window. If you survive, you've lost the movement, so maybe you have a hard time getting away. It has a tendency to be like really good in the early game because you get free movement out of it, or at the cost of a perk, you get some movement out of it, you get some dodge out of it. So I don't hate it. I think it lives in B tier, up here at the top-ish. Like, depending on my hero, I could be pretty excited. It can go like below First Blood. But it's decent, and in the right context, it's kind of useful. Overload. Bag slot plus an extra use of all consumable items per night. We like Overload. I think that I have warmed to Overload in recent times more so. I think on Blood Mages, it's a very excellent choice. More uses of the potions that you do end up acquire, whether they are energy potions, triple swipe scrolls, moving wall scrolls. It's always nice to have more uses of them and more bag slots for more diversity. Like I suggested before, I think it lives in the A tier. And I think it lives... I'm just going to split up Sanguine Fuel and Bodybuilder just to be divisive. I think it's somewhere in that middle category. Likely on the heroes that I would be using it with, I'm probably going to take Bodybuilder first, but it has pretty broad applicability and is kind of useful, in a lot of different situations. Next, we have Carnage. Carnage is very interesting. Dwarf only, whenever you hit 5 enemies with a single attack, restore 1 movement and gain 5% damage for 2 turns. On multi-hit style builds, Carnage can be game-changingly strong. You can roll a lot of damage. Also, like Great Axe, Propagate style builds, like if you're rocking a Gauntlet, you can hit 5 enemies pretty reliably and start rolling a decent amount of damage. I have never had it like fully pop off. And I don't know if that's like a shortcoming of mine or what's going on there, but like for now, I think Carnage, it lives firmly in the A tier, but I can't put it crazy high in the A tier because I've never seen it really be like game changing. I've never had a build where I have like, where I'm rolling like 50% damage from Carnage. What would we have to do to even accomplish that? We would have to hit 10 times 5 or more targets. That's, well, I mean, I guess we'd only have to do half of that because it lasts for 2 turns. So you're hitting 5 times. That's basically like a hand crossbow worth of stuff if you include Blaze with a couple propagation bounces. So maybe on average, you're rolling maybe 25% damage from Carnage if you're really maxing it out and fully utilizing it. The regen of movement points, that one I haven't found the ability to really rely on in any way, shape, or form, so I don't count it too heavily. I like it in A tier. I recognize that it is good. Then we have Thickness. Thickness is really good. So the Dwarves got really decked out on tier 2 here. Every 9% damage becomes 4% resistance. This is one of those ones where you think about it with Sanguine Fuel, you think about it with Berserk, and you're just like, I'm going to have 100% resistance. Not directly just from this, but like it gives you a huge amount of damage mitigation for and synergizes so well with so many different perks that give you plus damage. And it generally just means that you can say, I have a defensive hero, taking damage is also yielding me some improvement in my overall resistance. And so I like thickness. I like it a lot. I'm going to put it at the top of A tier. I think that having something that converts damage into some additional resilience for your heroes is very, very strong. And there's a lot of internal synergy that makes it very good. Doesn't quite eke into A tier because while I do now have some heroes that are designed to take all the abuse, I will also say I've had plenty of heroes that have thickness, tons of damage, doing really well. 2 boomers can still take him out at the knees. It is hard to create a fully unkillable hero in this game. Then we have Relentless. So I want to read the full description of Relentless because I think I don't always do a great job utilizing Relentless fully. So whenever a hero has 3 or less movement points and attacks in melee range, so you need to be adjacent to the thing you're attacking, get back 1 movement point, increase by 1 if at least one of the targets is killed. So it is potentially 2 movement points back, but you have to be in melee range. I think oftentimes I don't do a good job of taking advantage of this because this is a momentum hero skill, to be sure. And momentum heroes, like if you're rocking proximity shot on a pistol, you're probably proccing Relentless pretty frequently because you're getting close. But it doesn't proc 100% of the time. And I'm starting to think that while inertia is absolutely a requirement of every momentum build that I'm building, I think you can sometimes get away without Relentless. And to that end, that means that I'm going to put Relentless up here like at the top of B tier. I think it's good, but I don't think it's like inertia levels of good. Then we move on to Vampire. Whenever an enemy is killed with a physical attacker and execute, restore 4 health. This is modifiable by healing received, and to get value out of Vampire, you do need a little bit of healing received to get that number up into the places that you need it to be. That being said, there is an incredible premium on healing in the last spell. There are not that many sources. There's basically like Blood Collector for blood mages, there's Vampire, and then there's healing potions. And that may literally be everything when it comes to healing received. And that's not very much. Oh, there is also Toxic Leech, but Toxic Leech is kind of bad. But that's basically, I think I just listed every single healing ability, and Vampire is far and away the most reliable. Vampire with any type of blood mage rocking physical weapons is extremely potent at giving you the sustain that you need, and basically this coupled with Blood Mage is a 1-2 combo that means that you can free cast all of your mana costing abilities every single turn with Reckless Abandon, and I rate that very, very highly. So to that end, I think Vampire is going to live at top of A tier. It's good. It has some build-defining characteristics to it, and yeah, I think it's very, very strong. Energized. Every 7 mana you spend, restore 1 action point. 7 mana is an awkward number. I think that's the issue. So 7 mana is like 2 magic missiles or a magic missile and an Armageddon. 7 mana means that like on average in a turn, I'm maybe getting 1 AP out of this, which is okay. The issue here is that Energized only procs off of your mana using abilities, obviously. And the things like Mana Collector, which are our like creme de la creme of like mana sustain abilities, are restoring 10 mana per turn. So you have to spend 7 to get 1 AP. If you're spending significantly more than 7, then you are you're falling victim to not being able to recoup all of the mana that you need to, and you're running at a mana deficit. So to that end, like I think Energized is okay, but like I put it like top of C tier. Like I don't find myself taking it. I think there are far better perks for getting back AP, and I generally just doesn't click with me. Interestingly though, Vivified, every 42 health spent, restore 1 action point, is a very different animal. And the reason that it is a very different animal for me is that you can spend 42 health surprisingly easily, and you have a lot better recoup for your health. You can spend 42 health and still be at 100% health thanks to Vampire. So to that end, Vivified is an exceptional Blood Mage perk that it isn't quite like game defining, but like I like it. You know, I like it as much as Sanguine Fuel, like maybe somewhere in here in A tier around Sprint's location. It's a bit of an apples to oranges comparison, but at the end of the day, the thing that I like about it is just that you are getting maybe 2 AP every single turn, and it's for basically 0 cost. You're never running at a deficit. You're just like, you're sitting there and you're like, give me more health spending abilities so that I can generate more AP. It's good. Thrifty. Of every 8 action points spent, the next mana consuming ability costs half, rounded down. It's okay. I used to like Thrifty a lot more because I think you can play around it and you can get a lot of mana savings out of it. And so to that end, like I think I put it somewhere in like B tier, where like if I have a hero that's not going to have any mana recoup, right? So they didn't roll Mana Collector. They aren't necessarily running Harvester. I'm probably going to be able to get most of their mana back thanks to just like Mana Wells as the alternative. And Thrifty is going to enable me to spend a little more conservatively while still getting the same bang for my buck. So I don't mind it. I think B tier is a good place for it. I rarely take it though. Self-care. I mean, when I see this rather than Vivified, I'm just bummed because health is a resource that, because of things like Vampire and Blood Collector, I'm never worried about. I just don't ever want my health consuming skills to cost less health. It's just a bad. It's bad when it shows up because it takes the spot of Vivified. It's not actively bad, and I will say that I am mainly saving F tier for things that are actively bad, and self-care is. There is maybe some world in which self-care works with a blood mage who is a potion-based blood mage who doesn't have as much healing because they're getting it from potions. Maybe you could take self-care and justify it. So it's not entirely bad, but it's struggling a little bit. Longer weapons. Give up nothing, aka 25% reliability, for 2 skill range. This is S tier from my perspective. It is one of those things where certain builds, like my stun builds with power staffs and sledgehammers, I'm just looking for longer weapons. Gosh, maybe it's bottom of A tier. I'm a little torn. We're gonna have a lot of S tiers coming up. A lot of the top tier perks are very S tier worthy. And longer weapons is really good. It's so much free skill range for so little benefit. I need to think about this for a second. I love it. I love it so much. And I see it in a lot of builds. It's so good if you're rocket jumping, if you're stunning entrancing, if you're just using a sledgehammer. You want longer weapons so badly. I think I'm still going to put it in A tier. It's not build defining. It's also amazing on sword momentum heroes too. It's just so good. But I think top of A tier is a safe place. It doesn't quite eke into the S tier category. What about shorter weapons? Do I want accuracy and reliability for losing skill range? I do not. That's an F tier. Firmly an F tier. I don't want to lose skill range for accuracy and reliability ever. This is a wasted perk slot. When it shows up rather than longer weapons, I weep softly, at least in my head. Okay. Enough about shorter weapons. It's bad. 1 by 1. Okay, whenever an isolated unit is killed, plus 4% damage or plus 6% when using physical damage up to 60%. Hitting a non-isolated removes 6% of that all the way down to 0. This ability requires so much babysitting, and And more important than that, it really requires you to duo on a side. You need a hero that is setting up the isolated targets, and you need one that is knocking them down who has one by one. It just doesn't work as an ability. You're also gaining less for killing an isolated unit than you are for when you hit a non-isolated unit. So you're losing it faster than you're gaining it unless you're doing physical damage. It's too hard to wrangle. It requires way too much babysitting. It suffers from a lot of the issues that propagation does, right? You spend so much time pruning that perfect line for your propagate, and then you're like, wow, that was incredible. That lightning bolt did so much damage, and it only took me 7 AP to make that lightning bolt do the job that it was supposed to do all by itself. So I think 1x1 is C tier for me. I can't really make it. I can't make it work. I've never found a build that can work with it. I think that it could become very interesting. Ooh, here's an interesting idea. So random sidebar. If there was an ability, maybe something like Mark, what if Mark not only debuffed dodge, but also made the unit count as isolated even if it was next to things? That could be really interesting with something like 1x1. Ooh, I love that idea. I don't know if that's possible with the way that the game is currently constructed, but that's freaking cool. I love that idea. Let's move on to Resupply, though. So Resupply, traps are powerful. I want to say right off the bat, I think traps are surprisingly strong. Ballistas require no babysitting. They just do their thing. They are vicious. They are brutal. They kill everything. They do an amazing job. Traps can do something similar, but their limited uses means that they have an upkeep cost in terms of material. They run out of efficacy over the course of like long nights, etc. And Resupply is really just like, it's a way to make them slightly less bad, but not to the point where I can put them in B tier. I think this lives somewhere in C tier, maybe around like the Jolly Drinker level, give or take. I think that's a very reasonable place to put it. It restores a charge on up to 9 traps, and it has a range of 6, and that's about all there is to it. If you're running traps, it's not the worst thing to pick up, but if you're running traps, why? Why are you running traps over ballistas? I'm super curious. Let me know what traps are good. Sometimes a ring of stun traps can be good, but like you need to have 9 traps in a box to even get full value out of this, which is a little hard. Sadist. Whenever a negative alteration is applied by the hero, plus 1% opportunism for 2 turns. Ooh boy. We'll put that up in S tier. I apologize that I'm doing it immediately before I talk about it, but Sadist is so good. So Sadist and Sadist builds, well, but hold on. It is good, but I think it's worse than Contaminate. So the thing that is amazing about Sadist is as you play with like a Sadist multi-hit hero, you can spread so much contagion that if you have sufficient density of mobs, the cap on how much opportunism you can roll is the sky's the limit. There's a member of our Discord, Abigail, and they have gotten over 500% opportunism in a single turn on a single hero using Sadist. And I know that that is even not unique to them. I think Illustrious has done similarly ridiculous things. So I generally don't play quite that way. I don't abuse it quite that hard. I don't do a lot of solo hero runs. It's very easy to do on solo hero runs specifically because you just have a lot of mobs that you have to kill. But Sadist is staggeringly powerful. And the fact that you get it 100% of the time when you get the debuff tree makes it incredibly easy to option, and you will always get it in conjunction with Contaminate and potentially with Mark, and you give it a hand crossbow and all of a sudden you're getting 3 opportunism for every single thing that you're spreading. Link this up with Blessing and all of a sudden you have 3 turns to stack it up, and then you're hitting the opportunism cap like with your eyes closed while you're sleeping. Toxic Leech. Okay, whenever a unit takes poison damage within range 5, restore 2 health. It is modified by healing received, but it is a very low base number. 2, it takes a long time for 2 percentage-wise to start getting up to the levels that Vampire with its 4 base are at. And so that makes it a little hard to recommend. Also, the 5 range is pretty limiting. I would love to see the range go up a little bit because the problem is, so here's where things get a little tricky, at least for me. If you have a hero that has, let's say, Poisonous and Toxic Leech, the place they need to be standing to get the benefit of Toxic Leech is outside the base or inside the base, because that's where you poison a bunch of enemies and they're dying there. The problem is you also want to be applying your poison through Poisonous outside of the base potentially, and if you're on the edge of the base, then you're maybe stopping enemies from coming in, and it's awkward trying to get value out of Toxic Leech compared to Vampire, which is just so incredibly reliable. So Toxic Leech for me lives firmly in the C tier. I have not built the builds that I want to build with Toxic Leech, and it makes me sad. I think that maybe if this was on par with Vampire, so 4 health, so it was really had a good healing engine to it, maybe I could see it working out with like Poison multi-hit Blood Mage builds or something like that. But as it stands now, it's pretty minor healing, all things considered, compared to some of the other options, and it's very awkward because of the skill range 5. If instead of skill range 5, it said heal 2 whenever poison damages an enemy that you applied poison to, then we'd be talking. Then I think there would be some real potential value to it. Blood Mage. Okay, so Blood Mage, if you are unfamiliar with it, which I hope you aren't, is pretty awesome. So it converts your mana into resistance. It converts your daily mana regen into daily health regen at a 1-to-1 rate. 25% of your mana becomes resistance. And now your abilities that previously cost mana cost health. The reason this is so incredible is, first of all, it enables extremely unique builds. So I put it up here firmly in the S tier above Septic Shock. That's an easy choice. Maybe it and Sadist are very close in my heart and mind. But because of the abundance of healing from Vampire, Blood Mage Vampire becomes all by itself insane. You don't really need anything else to just then take a spear out, triple swipe, flurry of strikes, and just go crazy and do an insane amount of damage and spend an insane amount of health, but recoup it all back immediately. Blood Mage is one of those abilities that is a holy grail from my perspective in a similar way to Mana Collector, in the sense that it is just a perk that you take that if it's coupled with Vampire, it changes the game completely and completely removes your need to worry about mana. You can cast all of your strongest abilities all of the time very happily. Then we move to Initiator. Initiator is one that I got a lot of criticism, feedback. People like Initiator more than I like Initiator. Now, the reason is I think twofold. So one, if I'm playing like the normal game, right? So I'm not doing some crazy challenge where I'm throwing away my weapons every turn or something like that. I try to get all of my multi-hit heroes to the multi-hit cap. It usually happens after Initiator is offered. So, I get offered Initiator at tier 3, and then I'm like, okay, I could take Initiator. None of my heroes are at multi-hit cap now, but by the end of the run, they will be. And once you get to the end of a run and you've taken Initiator, your first attack of the turn is just worse. It's minus 10% damage with no benefit because these 2 multi-hit don't go over the 5 multi-hit cap. So as it stands right now, Initiator is not great. The other thing that I hear sometimes is that Initiator is really good if you keep your damage really low and go for a dagger build and go poison multi-hit. And you're intentionally just spreading as much poison as possible and not doing damage. You want to be killing stuff. You don't want to be building a hero that has bad damage. It's just, it doesn't play well. There are better things that you can be doing. I really like my poison multi-hit heroes when they are killing lots of things too. It's nice to do both. So Initiator for me My knee-jerk reaction is still to put it in F tier. I think that it's a bit of a trap. You should be finding your multi-hit in other places. There's lots of gear that gives you lots of multi-hit. You get it a lot if you take advanced training as a level up. And so I think because of that dialogue, I'm going to continue putting it down here in F tier, which I know is probably going to ruffle some feathers. But I think that the one place where it potentially has a redeeming value, and I have talked about this a little bit, is on a hero who kind of like incidentally does some multi-hitting. And the hero that I am thinking of is Blood Mages with spears specifically. Their first attack being a flurry of blows. It's not necessarily worth investing in multi-hit on a Blood Mage, broadly speaking. I would still take it if it's offered, but I'm not going to like itemize towards it necessarily. And grabbing Initiator, they generally have more damage than they know what to do with. And just having 2 extra multi-hits on that singular attack that you're doing with your spear is pretty good. Is it enough for me to put it at the bottom of C tier? I think it is. I think there is a situation where Initiator is not hot garbage, and I will bring it up to C tier. I worry that means that F tier is going to be a little empty, but we'll try our best to fill it up with some garbage. Next, we have Lone Wolf. I immediately looked at the reliability on isolated targets, and I was like, should it go into F tier? Anyways, Lone Wolf. This is 30% damage if a hero is truly all by themselves 10 tiles from the next nearest hero. Surprisingly good. 30% damage is a lot of damage to get for very little downside, since a lot of times I'm playing with not a full roster of 6 heroes, and I can get heroes to be all by themselves and get a little extra damage from this. I like Lone Wolf. I think that I can put it like down here in the bottom of A tier. I think it fits somewhere in there because in a lot of cases, Magic Fuel is going to be almost giving me the same amount of damage. Not quite, but it's totally evergreen. Doesn't matter where my heroes are. I don't have to think about it. This requires a little bit of babysitting to get maybe marginally more value. Quantity versus quality. You get 3 propagation bounces and worse propagation damage, and then every 8 enemies killed by propagation is -1 propagation bounce and more propagation damage. Resets every morning. This is a trap skill. Fits firmly in F tier. We'll put it way down at the bottom of F tier. Here's the reason why. Doesn't matter what ability you're using, except for maybe Weakening Touch on the tome. You're going to be killing stuff with your propagate. And if you are not careful with quantity versus quality, even if you're running bees, you're going to kill things because bees has a surprisingly high base damage. If bees didn't have damage associated with it, then we might be having a different discussion here. But you're going to have it bounce back and forth. It's going to kill people with its base damage. It's going to happen. And the thing is quantity versus quality can lower your propagation bounces below 0. The minimum value for propagation bounces is -2, and quantity versus quality can take you all the way to -2. Not a pleasant thing when it happens. It has happened to me. So you have to be very careful with this perk because it will give you +3, but it will take you all the way down to sub-basement 12 in terms of propagation bounces. If this ability was +3 propagation bounces and it could reduce your propagation bounces back down to being net 0 while increasing your propagation damage, then we'd be talking. But this can start to go negative, and that is very bad for business. Runic Gift. Runic Gift would be an auto take if all it did was increase your trinket slots and didn't give you plus mana. But for some reason, it gives you plus mana too. 3 per item level. So if you have 2 trinkets and they're both level 5, you're rocking 30 mana from Runic Gift plus an extra trinket slot, which is an insane amount of stats that comes along with it. Runic Gift is just always good. Always good. Like top of S tier. Like if I see Runic Gift, I'm almost always taking it. There is no build that doesn't benefit from additional trinkets. So go figure. Look at my muscles. There has been a lot of chuckling and whatnot around look at my muscles, because you can get it on a hero that is a nudist, aka already can't equip a body armor slot, and it's +2 action points. I don't think this is a good perk. I think that 2 action points feels like a lot of action points. You can get it off a trinket or, you know, various other places if you get lucky rolls. There's a lot of ways to get action points. And you can get a fair number of action points just from leveling up, especially if you're running Advanced Training Omen, which you should be. But the body armor slot confers an incredible amount of defense that is very easy, I think, to underestimate. On a dwarf, you get a fair amount of innate block with that dwarf. I think that helps out a bit. But 9 times out of 10, the only time I would consider using Look at My Muscles is in situations where I have a hero that already can't use their chest slot for some reason, and that's not even a niche worth considering, in my opinion. It's incredibly unrealistic to roll. The other thing is, if you're really looking to get action points out of your chest slot, you can get 1 action point very reliably on your chest slot. So the net value here is probably 1 action point. You're losing probably like 50 to 60 armor. You're losing a ton of stats. This one is going to live down here. I'm going to put it at the top of S tier. I'm going to be a little F tier, excuse me, not S tier. I'm going to put it down there. It's not good. Cannot recommend. Hard as a rock. Whenever an enemy is killed, +1 block. I don't know where this perk like lives or what we're trying to accomplish with it. With Blessing, it could be a lot of block that you're potentially getting, but block is not that hard to come by. I had a hero yesterday that was not that crazy, that had 85 block, was almost block capped without any perks whatsoever. So if you're going for block because you're a hedgehog or something like that, I think that survivability that is on a timer and that you have to babysit is slightly dangerous survivability, right? I don't like my heroes radically like roller coastering how likely they are to survive. And I think Hard as a Rock is a classic example of one turn you can be very strong, take a bunch of hits, and the next turn you blink and you're like, why did my hero die? And it's because you had a turn that you were extinguishing torches on Elderlicht and you didn't kill that many enemies, and then all of a sudden you went from having +25 block to having +0 block and you get blown up or something like that. So I don't like it. I wouldn't consider it actively bad. It's over here in like back protection country. Hard as a Rock doesn't interest me that much. Head on. Every 4 tiles traveled, excluding seals with no momentum, the next target gets +15% damage and unblockable. I almost never take this ability. On a sword momentum hero, there is potentially some argument for this for helping you to take out things like guardians and splitters and bulkies because of their higher block stat. 15% damage is not nothing. Moving 4 tiles with a sword is relatively easy. I think this lives firmly at the bottom of B tier. It's okay. It doesn't quite fit in that C tier of like, do I really care? I almost never take this. I'm not that interested. But I don't utilize this too heavily. I generally find that at the tier 4 slot, this feels a little underwhelming. Doesn't move the needle too crazy far. Organic Armor is next. Organic Armor is a tough one. I have really mixed feelings about Organic Armor. Obviously, in the Coagulation Organic Armor Bodybuilder archetype, Organic Armor does pretty well, but losing your hero's ablative health, aka armor, is a big deal. Like, it means that every little thing that is shooting you is chipping you down. Every archer that hits you is doing damage directly to your health. Every boomer that explodes on you is doing damage directly to your health. And so to that end, in the world of thickness, sanguine fuel, bodybuilder, organic armor, etc., like, it works. It's good, but it does come with like a non-zero downside. And so to that end, I think I put it in like B tier as like not... It's pros with cons. You can get a lot of health from it. It can potentially, with Coagulation, turn daily health regen into your single largest health increase. And having a health increase as a secondary stat is amazing. So that's why it's going top of B tier. But it struggles a little bit, and it can be very dangerous to take early game, I will say, because you can create a hero that is surprisingly squishy, and the 50% healing received does not necessarily make Vampire able to sustain them. I had a hero just yesterday who never got enough healing received to really offset it, and they were kind of always constantly struggling to kill enough things to do enough damage. Blink. 3 mana, vision, maneuver, no momentum, teleport. Yeah. I like Blink a lot. I think Blink is a great mobility skill. I think that mana is often pretty abundant in the late game, and having a 6 range move is just really good, to the point where I put it like up here in A tier along with like Tossable Fellow. Like it's a great mobility skill. I like that it comes online pretty late in the game. Gives you that extra like option for kind of moving around. Explosive Essence. Mana consuming skills get more crit power. My crit builds do often feature mana based skills. We're talking Magic Missile, we're talking Armageddon, but there aren't that many of them, and I prefer my crit power to be evergreen. And we have another skill coming up, cough, Crit Master, that might be slightly better as a source of crit power. So I don't love it. It's certainly not bad per se. Like I think it's in this category along with like First Blood, where it's like, yeah, 50% crit power is nothing to sneeze at. In some cases, it can be very useful. It doesn't affect all the skills I want it to, and I want to be critting and critting big on everything across the board. So it doesn't quite sneak into A tier for me. I think it's very happy in like the top half of B tier. Explosive Hemoglobin, on the other hand, I think lives a little lower. It's basically the same thing, but it's health consuming skills rather than mana consuming skills. I look at it and I go like maybe like bottom of B tier, like it's still fine. I'm just not building crit that much on health consuming heroes. They have a lot of other things that they're trying to get with their primary stats. I find that damage does really well on them despite the diminishing returns. I still pick up some crit, but like crit blood mages are not something I build too terribly frequently. Proximity Shot. Okay, so this is your pistol momentum build kind of like amazing skill. It also works shockingly well with the cannon, with the overheat explosion, which is also point blank. So there's a lot of ways in which Proximity Shot I think is exceptionally strong. And to that end, I'm weighing here. Like Proximity Shot is one of those ones that could be like top of A, bottom of S from my perspective. 40% total damage as perk damage is exceptionally good. I think the text on this one technically changed with the new update, and now it would say perk damage for those who are more familiar with that nomenclature, but it's always been the same thing. It's a category of perk provided damage increase that does not suffer a diminishing return with damage or other things. I think Proximity Shot, because it only benefits pistols, it gets a little bit of a notch down. If this affected all things, it would be every momentum hero's dream and just insane for so many things. But Proximity Shot has a lot of applicability. Crit cannon builds, momentum builds with pistols. Pistol is probably my favorite momentum weapon, so it gets high marks for that. Field Study. Do we want a lot of range? Do we want not a lot of skill range early in nights and a lot of range late? And the answer is no. So here's the problem as I see it. So it's every 12 units killed at a distance of 4 or more gain a skill range. The only way that this perk works for you is for you to have low skill range when you start a night. So you have to start a night without a lot of skill range, because it's going to give you a lot of skill range, but it's not going to let you exceed the cap of skill range. The cap of skill range is 8. So if you kill 36 enemies at a distance of 4 or more, you've gained 3 skill range. So for that to be effective, you have to start with 5 out of 8 skill range. Every time you increase that by 1, you say now you've killed 48 enemies. Now you've killed, 60 enemies. Then when you've killed 60 enemies, what you're at? That's 5, I think. Yeah, I think that's 5. So you've gained 5 skill range, which means for that to be useful, you had to have 3. So what I'm getting at with this is basically like Field Study gives you a lot of skill range, but it only works well if you start out with not a lot of skill range, and I like my skill range to be evergreen so that my hero isn't like struggling early game and then late game they're kind of coming online. So to that end, I don't love Field Study. I don't think it's like bottom of C tier. I'll put it like over here. I'll almost take anything else over it. As a tier 4 perk goes, it's pretty freaking weak. I always prefer to see Proximity Shot. Crit Master. Every 5 critical hits landed plus 4% crit power. This is the heart, the soul, and the engine of every multi-hit build. It is insane how much crit power you can stack up with Crit Master because multi-hit allows you, say with a hand crossbow, to trigger it every single attack. You're gaining 4% crit power. Your crit power number can go to the moon. And I think to that end, it is insane. If you build a crit hero, I still think that crit heroes, it plays super well with Sadist, but crit heroes of their own without Sadist necessarily are gaining more value from crit coupled with mana collector, etc., than you're going to see from Sadist. So I think it edges them out. Runic Gift is still like, you always take Runic Gift. It's amazing too. But I actually think it might go, I mean, yeah, Runic Gift is just always good. So I'm going to put it at the top there. Human Ballista. So Human Ballista it takes your maximum damage stat and it basically turns you into a ballista that fires 2 shots, seasoned operator style. It is range modifiable, but it's shooting the nearest enemies that it can hit. So the range modifiability is kind of like, who cares? It oftentimes will just kill things outside of the haven that you didn't want to kill if that's the closest enemy. And it's range 2 to 7, which means it historically, way back in the day, it protected your heroes. So your enemies would rush up to your hero and it would kill 2 of the enemies standing next to your hero. So for like a defensive hero, it would protect them at least. That's no longer the case. Now it won't attack enemies that are adjacent, which means that I think it's quite bad. Maybe not Initiator bad. Maybe like maybe it goes pretty high in C tier. I mean, it is doing damage. It does have that going for it, but it was so much better when it had a range of 1. That's basically what I will say. Bully. All right, so Bully is another one of these where if you have 100% crit, it's not useful. Now, Bully stacks off of the types of negative alterations. So if you have poison, debuff, contagion, and stun on an enemy, you get 100% crit. But if you have accuracy and dodge reduction, that does not count as 2 and you only get 25% crit. That being said, 25% crit is a lot, and you can basically take Bully and be like, I'm not going to take any crit on this hero. So for Sadist builds where you're already stacking that up, I think that Bully is very strong because it frees up your primary stats to be damage for, damage or other things that you need. You don't have to invest in crit. Generally speaking, I think you can expect somewhere between 25 and 50% crit from this, like on average. You're not going to get 75% crit every single time. Although if you're running a hand crossbow, you will have slow death. You maybe have mark, and then you maybe have contagion to get you 75%. But overall, I think it is nice. The crit power loss is pretty negligible, which means I'm going to put it in A tier. I think I'm going to put it like around thickness. Like it's very good. And you will see something here that's starting to form up. The debuff tree, Contagion, Sadist, and Bully, very highly ranked. We move on to Epidemic. So Epidemic is the other source of contagion in the game. And this one is if you apply poison, you also apply contagion. Epidemic has an internal anti-synergy, which is to say that contagion will not spread to something that already has contagion. So if you apply contagion to a whole line of enemies, we talked about this before, where you could apply it to the first enemy, and as you kill, you're doubling, you're multiplying the poison each time across the way. If you do this and you have Epidemic on a bee's staff, it doesn't work well because everything that got poison is now immune to receiving more poison, which is not good. That being said, for targeted poison, Epidemic is pretty exceptionally good. So the primary example that I would give of this is if you have a poison multi-hit hero, so hand crossbow plus dagger. All of your poison is pinpoint accurate. So you can do like 2 multi-hits over here of poison daggers, 2 over here and 2 over there. And those are the only people that will get Epidemic. And then you can kill those and spread out the stun and Epidemic and everything else from there. So I like Epidemic in that very specific case, but with bees, with poisonous, it is not good. And so as a result, I put it at the bottom of I put it at the top of B tier. It's kind of like organic armor in the sense that it has some major downsides if not used correctly, but when used correctly, it is very powerful. Moving on to flexibility. 25% perk damage, aka total damage is what it was previously called, if you are switching damage types each time you attack. So most of the best builds in the game, in my opinion, have different damage types. Blood mages are kind of the example. I almost always run them with vampire and physical weapons exclusively. But in most cases, if I'm running momentum, it's like magic scepter plus pistol. If I'm running multi-hit, I'm running hand crossbow and wand. If I'm running poison multi-hit, I'm running hand crossbow and dagger. So I'm trying to dip into multiple categories, and so this is a 25% damage increase as long as I remember to alternate between them. Very, very good. I really like it. It's in A tier. It doesn't quite top A tier. Like maybe like over here by like Vivified and Glass Cannon, I think is a reasonable place to put it. Inertia is the defining momentum skill, in my opinion. Now, there's an interesting parallel that I've been thinking about between I used to really like mana regen, and then I shifted over to liking large mana pools. And there's an argument to be made that this is movement regen, and maybe at some point I'll be like, I just like a larger movement pool. The issue is that your movement pool is never that big. So you're never going to have more than the maximum of 17 movement. So to that end, having ways to recoup it, especially for heroes that need to be hypermobile and that are doing a lot of momentum attacks, Inertia to me is the S tier ability in this category. Getting 2 movement back every time you attack means that if you have a momentum hero with 12 AP, they're going to be able to go everywhere. You give them this, you give them Relentless, and they're getting back as much as 4 movement per attack, which is insane. Really, really powerful and really beneficial. It's why my momentum heroes generally are Inertia, Relentless, and Boom is kind of like the holy trinity. So yeah, I like Inertia. It gives you a lot of flexibility. The fact that you can move, build up momentum, kill something, get back most of the movement, and rinse and repeat, especially on high movement heroes. Inertia is incredibly powerful, but it doesn't carry completely. You need a little bit more movement regeneration, which is why I like to pair it with Relentless. Specialist. It disables a second weapon in exchange for 50% damage and +1 use to every skill on that weapon. It's a trap. It's a freaking trap. It's way down there at the bottom of being a trap, in my opinion, too. You gain so many stats. You gain so many uses of skills from having a second weapon. I cannot recommend ever taking Specialist. If this said that you double the number of uses on your primary weapon, maybe we'd be talking, but you'd still be losing flexibility, right? So you have 2 weapons that can have 2 unique skill sets that synergize with each other. All of that you're abandoning. So to really make Specialist work, I'd have to ask the question, like if I essentially could turn my 1 spear into 2 spears, double all of its uses, and I got 50% damage, would I take that over having a second thing like a War Shield? And even then, I struggle. I really struggle. So Specialist, I think, firmly deserving of F rank in its current form. I don't even know how I would fix it. It's that far gone. Volatile. Propagation bounces bounce diagonally, +1 propagation bounce. Excellent, excellent perk. It does make your abilities a little unpredictable. It's a great way to get your heroes killed. That's for sure. There's no way around that. But like, you're just, the number of times I've been like, oh yeah, I got volatile last turn and now I have poisoned to death one of my heroes. Although lately what I've been doing is instead volatile traces to one of my like hedgehog heroes with Spiky Counter, and it ends up killing the person who cast the propagate rather than the other way around, which I think is hilarious. But volatile is very good. Great with bees, great with weakening touch. But mostly great with bees, and then also I think great on the new Gauntlet heroes. I think their propagate attack benefits hugely from the diagonal, and the fact that they give you a bonus propagation is also really, really good, to the point where I think it is top of A. It almost ekes into S tier for me, but not quite. Mana Shield. Every 2 mana spent, gain 3 block. Maybe there's like a non-Blood Mage hedgehog someday that likes Mana Shield, but like I was saying before, block is pretty abundant. There are a lot of places you can potentially get it. Mana Shield is not necessarily my favorite, especially since the block wears off. We had this discussion before. You need to be like constantly cycling it. Like if you use this perfectly in concert with Mana Collector, you'd be gaining 15 block for 3 turns. You'd be gaining 45 block on the 3rd turn moving forward, which is a lot of block. But it requires kind of perfect play. You take a break, you don't use all your mana on a particular turn, and then all of a sudden your block drops, and then maybe, you know, something terrible happens. So to that end, I'm gonna put it top of C tier. I think it's slightly better than Hard as a Rock from my perspective. In fact, yeah, I'm going to put it bottom of B tier. I'll give it that solid. Blood Shield, just because health is so much easier to spend, because you're spending 4x the health, I will, and that actually, that's very interesting. I hadn't noticed this before. So 2 mana converts into 12 health. The increase in health from Blood Mage is 4x. So logically, this would be 8 health. But I think 8 health you would abuse the heck out of and get so much. I think even in this current form, because health is essentially free for Blood Mages, I'm going to put it up here under Spiky Counter as slightly better than its original version. Then we move on to You're Next. Every 2 enemies hit, minus 12 resistance for 2 turns to a random enemy within 6 range. It pairs super well with Sadist. I think this is such a fascinating perk. I really love the design on this one. On multi-hit heroes, it is super fun because you just, especially like multi-hit Sadist heroes, you're just applying debuffs like crazy. You do a hand crossbow shot and you hit 4 targets. You also picked up 2% opportunism for literally free, and you softened up other targets because this is one of a very limited number of ways that you can get minus resistance. The only other ways are weakening touch and the gauntlet snaps secondary attacks. So to that end, I really like You're Next a lot. So top of A tier for me. I don't think it's an S tier, but I think it's really fun. When it works, it does great work. Emergency Tunnel. What a fascinating ability. Okay, so what it does is it allows you to move to any tile in the Haven. It's a teleport. It costs 15 health. You get to use it twice per night, and you can only use it once per turn. It is a no momentum maneuver. It's a bit limiting. There's no question that its upshot when it works is knock your socks off amazing. But the 2 uses, I understand why without the 2 uses per night, it would be insanely strong. Like on a Blood Mage, every single turn they can cross the map and then recoup their health. It would be completely insane. That's why it has limited uses per night. But the limited uses feel a little limiting. This is a very hotly contested tier of perks. Tier 4 perks are really good. Right? This is up against some truly amazing perks, and I just don't know if it has what it takes to kind of like go toe to toe with them. I think it's still good. I'm going to put it at the bottom of B tier, maybe up a little bit. Like, I mean, it's better than Body Count Contest. It's like, it's maybe here. I think it's good. It just doesn't single-handedly move the needle. Which brings us on to our tier 5 perks. Berserk. What an insane perk. Especially in this new meta of taking hits can be good. Hedgehogs are strong. You have War Shield to pair up with this. You can get so much damage out of Berserk. It's kind of insane. It clearly lives in S tier. I'm gonna put it here just to split up Contamination and Sadist. It's a little more niche than Sadist, so maybe I'll put it here with Blood Mage. But it is very, very strong. Its counterpart, its alternative is Boom, which is also exceptional. So overkill damage is transferred to adjacent units except the hero whenever an enemy is overkilled. So when you start getting really strong with Boom, it starts to go really hard. And with things like Momentum Boom turns a hero that struggles with wave clear into a wave clear machine. And I love Boom. And I think that Boom does edge out Sadist. Now, this is potentially controversial. These are both exceptional. They're really, really good. The thing that I love about Boom is that, especially with Sadist, coupled with Sadist, the way that Contaminate works, sometimes AoE attacks that you do with Contagion will eat the Contagion, right? So if you have a Contagion in the middle of an AoE and you do an AoE, Contagion doesn't spread outside of it. That didn't always used to be the case. It used to be a very strange setup, but nowadays that's the way that it works. Boom, though, is a second attack that triggers afterwards, and as a result, Boom can be exceptionally good at spreading Contaminate, because you will never lose a Contaminate that is on the edge of the damage you did and the Boom that is happening beyond it. So what you can do is you can spread an insane amount of debuffs using Boom plus Contagion plus Sadist and stack up some really crazy numbers. It's really fun. Highly recommended. Next, we have Sheer Power. It's definitely the mana skill that I don't want to see. It halves the resistance of whatever you are attacking, and it is cumulative with magic damage, making magic damage do full damage regardless of the target's resistance. Can be really nice for killing Twisted, lots of other things. I will still often take this one, but it lives somewhere in like the bottom of A tier from my perspective. Maybe up like a little bit like over here where Carnage is. It is a level 5 perk, so it, you know, it's not being directly compared against them, but it's good. Definitely good. Then we have Mana Collector. Okay, Mana Collector, again, build defining. It's one of those skills that is just evergreen good. Basically every hero, with the exception of maybe like momentum heroes and stun heroes, wants lots of mana and wants to be able to use mana effectively. Hold on, I need to take this down a notch. The thing about it is, the downside is that you need crit. And lots of my favorite builds utilize crit, but it is not universal that every mana using ability utilizes crit. So I'm going to put it down here at the bottom of S tier. I think it's still exceptional. For heroes that you know you're going to build into Mana Collector, not having to worry about mana anymore makes them absolute machines, destroyers of worlds. We really love Mana Collector, but it's not for free. You're investing a lot of energy getting to the point where you have high crit so that you can get back the 10 mana per turn. The next one, and this is a surprise to me, is Blood Collector. So Blood Collector is the equivalent of Mana Collector, and I've written it off largely historically because it's up to 20 per turn, which felt very unimpactful, but it is affected by healing received. And so I've had some successful runs that were recommended by the community. Thank you, Illustrious, for the recommendation of the Canon Blood Collector build. It took us a while to find the right hero. There were a lot of moving parts there, but it is a source of healing that does not rely on physical damage, which makes it have some upshot. Like I like it more than I liked it before. It doesn't crack into S tier for me because it's a little situational, but we'll put it like in the bully camp over here. Like it's above the halfway point. It can be a good source of healing if you're going for a crit blood mage that is not using melee weapons and does not have vampire. So it's kind of like a backup for vampire, but it definitely belongs below vampire. Surgical Strike. Tagging full health units, you gain 50 reliability and 20 accuracy. This is going to be my controversial one. I'm going to put this in F tier. This belongs here. And the reason I'm going to put it in F tier is that this is too freaking little too late. This is a tier 5 perk. And you're giving me accuracy that if I have made it to tier 5 without taking accuracy, I don't need it now. And I don't care about 50% reliability. My gear is probably giving me 100% reliability by accident by the time that I get here. Surgical Strike is a waste of a very precious slot, and for that reason, it makes me angry, and I put it in F tier, despite the fact that it is not actively bad. It's the one in F tier that is not actively bad. Exploit Weakness. It allows you to convert your accuracy into isolation and your resistance reduction into opportunism. I like this perk. I think it's quite strong. It hits above its weight class a surprising amount of time because you can get a lot of accuracy that you didn't think you wanted or that you didn't think you were getting. I occasionally will like look at a character stat sheet and be like, why does this hero have 75 accuracy? And if I could convert that into isolation, that's crazy good. I generally don't take as much resistance reduction, so it's not as great for stacking up opportunism in my mind, but it does allow you to take 2 primary stats and multiply their value by also making them give you some of the strongest secondary stats. So for that reason, it lives in A tier. It lives up here at the top of A tier too. Not quite cracking into the rarefied atmosphere of S, but Exploit Weakness is very strong. Legendary Assassin. Killing isolated targets restores AP. This is just a powerhouse ability. Everybody is killing isolated targets, so it's a lot of free AP. Everybody's doing it. It doesn't require any crit. It doesn't require anything like that. Legendary Assassin is one of those ones that I will take on a hero regardless of what they're doing. Obviously, it goes crazy on multi-hit heroes where you can be like, okay, if I play this hero correctly, I can basically go infinite on AP. But even on heroes that don't, you're still picking up maybe a couple AP a turn, which is fantastic for basically free. And if you're a little more mindful about it, it can be a lot more. Then we have Fortress Master. Right now, I'm a little down on Fortress Master because I've been doing a lot of challenges where I don't run any type of defenses, but Fortress Master is very good. It stacks. So if you have 6 heroes with Fortress Master, your ballistas are hitting for astronomically large, like 300 plus damage for each ballista shot. It is very good. It's going to live at the bottom of S tier here. For people that are just trying to conquer the game and want to play like a defensive corpse strat, ball of death ballista strategy, Fortress Master is exceptionally good and you can do a lot of work with it. Hex. So Hex just elongates your buffs. Or your debuffs, excuse me. It does affect debuffs like the negatives on beers, as an example, which I think is a little funny. That should probably be changed. But extending poison isn't that useful because by the time you're late game, poison is pretty crazy. Being able to extend Contaminate and your debuffs so that you can do more Sadist shenanigans is good. It is a good enabler, but it's not uniquely useful for those. The place where it really shines, without question, is stun builds. All stuns are 1 turn long. Making them 2 turns long feels like a lifetime, and it is incredibly powerful to that end. To the point where I'm going to put it like top of A tier. Yeah, I'll put it like over here. It's not an absolute requirement, but having the ability to stun things for 2 turns is pretty single-handedly insane. Potent Toxins makes your dots, your poisons tick faster, but do 100% more damage. It's great. If you're running poison multi-hit hero, even just a regular poison hero. Like Potent Toxins is one that I almost always take because it's hard to cap at 500% poison without. And the thing about poison is it's uniquely balanced. Every other damage stat in the game has some type of cumulative relationship with all the other ones, right? So if you haven't watched my damage spreadsheet videos or those types of things, the idea is damage is diminishing returns with other damage. You take more and more damage and you get less and less proportionally from it. But then if you take physical damage, it stacks in a way that is kind of non-linear with damage, which can create some really large numbers for you. Poison, there's only one way to adjust poison, and it is poison. But poison can only be improved by poison the stat. That's what I mean to say. And so getting to 500% poison, the devs have done a good job making poison a good standalone stat. And as a result, I like potent toxins because 100% poison is a lot. Like if we saw 100% damage on something, we'd be like, wow, that's pretty crazy. So to that end, I think poison builds are a little niche, but I'm going to put it in like the same top of A camp. Adrenaline Rush. Dodge is unreliable at its absolute best. We've already talked about boomers and twisted being able to completely circumvent dodge. But even then, if you're getting absolutely pummeled on, you're going to occasionally take hits. So you have to take dodge in concert with something else. Dodge plus block, dodge plus armor, dodge plus resistance, so on and so forth. The AP that you get from Adrenaline Rush is good. You can take it with Blessing and it gets a little crazier, and you can stack an insane amount of AP, but you're capped at 12 AP. So Adrenaline Rush is this funky thing where the people that I want to put it on are generally more glass cannon-y, and stacking up a bunch of dodge just to max out my AP feels like a very big cost because it doesn't fully protect me. So to that end, I think this is going to live down in like the bottom of B tier. It's still okay. I just can't recommend it too highly. Big Game Hunter. The bigger they are, the harder they fall would be the alternate name for this one. And the short version is that this is potentially a huge amount of perk / total damage on very large enemies, aka bosses, aka bulkies, aka twisted. Big Game Hunter does a huge amount of work on all of them. We love Big Game Hunter because taking out the big enemies is often the hardest thing. This is incredible on momentum heroes, great on multi-hit heroes, just does a lot of work, firmly somewhere in the middle of S tier. Very, very good. Doesn't help you with wave clear, but by the end of the game, I think wave clear is not anyone's biggest problem. Blessing increases the duration of your buffs, and it synergizes with so many things. This is the thing that I love about Blessing is that it synergizes with everything from cheer to sadist to, you know, everything in between. Lots of these block things that we've been talking about. Carnage benefits from it. The Adrenaline Rush benefits from it. Not that we think that's particularly good, but the list kind of goes on. There are a lot of things that benefit quite greatly from Bless, a lot of potion effects, etc. So I put Bless up here, I think in the like Berserk camp, where it is surprising how much benefit you can potentially get from Blessing, and I'm always kind of excited to see it. Don't Panic. No effect on bosses, limited effect on final nights as a general rule of thumb, but 40% damage is a lot of damage for helping you with wave clear. It comes a little late. Having this as a tier 5 perk is just rough because if you're doing corpse strats, you've been killing everything inside your base anyways, and it is a nice little power spike, but it struggles a little bit. I don't really care about the accuracy on it, but you know, it is firmly high A tier. Probably above Hex, and we'll put it like somewhere like that, maybe under Volatile. I want to put Proximity Shot above it. I think I like Proximity Shot slightly more. Night Owl. I used to think this was good for Runenberg, but Runenberg got shorter. Runenberg used to have a really long final night. The problem with Night Owl is that it comes online really late in most nights. Like it comes online when you're finishing the night, generally speaking. Like the 5th night is a long time to wait, and there's a lot of fighting that happens before Night Owl comes online. It's not actively bad. It just lives down here in the category of like, you can do much better. Then we have Warcry. I thought Warcry was just terrible the first time I saw it. But with the right hero, I think Warcry, with the right build, if you get Blessing, because Blessing and Warcry play well together. If you get Blessing, you get an organic armor hero with a huge amount of health. You whittle them down with, say, cannons, spend a bunch of their health, so they're at like 150 health, and they have 850 health that is missing. You take 850, you divide it by 20, you end up with a very large number of damage that you are potentially distributing to 6 heroes. So the total damage that you are getting from this over 2 turns is insane. I have practically had heroes that were all of my heroes were gaining like 60% damage from this over the course of 2 turns. And then my hero who had Warcry wasn't ineffective. They were still a crit hero. They were still doing multi-hit. They were still, you know, doing the job that they needed to do. So I think Warcry is pretty cool. The build is a little memey and a little niche, but I think it lives up here in like the blood collector space. Like, it's cool. I think there's something there, and I'm never mad. One of these days, maybe I'll do like a 3 Warcry hero build where all of them are kind of like doing that, and I'll have all my heroes probably at like 500% damage, and it might be truly bananas. The other one that we're working with is Heart of the Party. Every 200 damage inflicted plus 3 armor to all heroes. Again, I think the Dwarves got a lot of love on tier 5. And I think Heart of the Party is one of those ones that's a real unsung hero of the Dwarven perks. Because I think on the right hero, you put this on a multi-hit hero who's doing a lot of wave clear, and this basically makes the rest of your heroes like unkillable sort of regardless. Like, I will often find myself floating like 80 plus armor a turn on them. So like 160 total armor, which is insane. That is a lot of armor. I think, again, it still lives in A tier. Maybe like it's easier to enable than Warcry. It's just kind of like a freebie. So I'll put it here with like Hex. It's good though. It does a lot of work potentially. And that is all of the tier 5s. And now we're on to the stone metal perks. And the first one of those is Against the Wall. Against the Wall is interesting. So it is 10% damage for every 2 level ups. And it is only active when you're standing against some type of object, be it a tree or obstacle or whatever it happens to be. I've had some good luck with this. The thing that I will say at the end of a run that is surprising is you can potentially be getting like 30 plus damage % out of this. And, excuse me, sorry, I spoke that before. It's 10% damage plus 2 for each level. So if you have a level 12 hero, they're getting 22 damage out of this. I sometimes have much higher level heroes, but anyways, you're potentially getting like 20 to 30 damage out of this particular metal, and it can come with stats. And so I've been surprised by how much I generally don't get that many stats out of some of my trinkets, and I can toss this on and be like, well, as long as they're standing against a wall, they're doing well. It is hard to stand against a wall and still do everything you need to do, especially with melee weapons. This also is not active if you're in a tower. It may be active if you're in a tower and you put a barricade next to the tower, but watchtowers, you are not adjacent to them when you are in them. To that end, I like this one. I think it's like mid A tier. It's pretty solid. Then we move on to Shower of Blows. So Shower of Blows is very interesting. At the moment, there are 2 things that reset Shower of Blows, and this may change in the future, so take this with a grain of salt, but I am going to rate it on its current form, which is that every turn it resets. So you cannot stack up Shower of Blows to 500% damage using undodgeable attacks. We tried. We tried that with some wands. It was a neat idea, but basically Shower of Blows stacks up your damage as your accuracy decreases. As I mentioned before, I think it plays well with Perserverance, because when you eventually miss, you sometimes get back an AP. But this is going to stack your damage higher and higher, and if you play it smart, you can do like maybe a magic missile to start, and then use all of your wand undodgeable attacks on the tail end of that, or use some rifle shots. And you can get a fair amount of damage bonus by the end of the turn, but it resetting on the turn kind of takes the wind out of that one. And I think it lives in B tier, where I don't think there's a niche build until hopefully it's fixed. If it became one of those things where you are where you can carry it over across the entirety of a particular night and it resets at the end of the night, then I could see that, you know, we might be playing with like some dual wand builds where we're just hitting 8 times and getting up to 500% damage. But for now, not really the thing. Mood swings. It lives up to its name. I think that's all I will say on the matter. Like it's never quite right. And I know that's kind of a harsh thing to say, but like even numbered nights are, first of all, a lot of the final nights. So you're getting 3 move out of this, which is meh. The 2 AP is more interesting, but the 2 AP is not something that you can rely on. So maybe you can grab one of these medals and do something with it once in a while. But like, I have literally never once in all of my playthroughs been like, oh, a mood swing medal, this is the perfect time for it. They always show up on odd nights or on even nights. Just not that great. Bottom of B tier for that one. I'm not going to go C tier, but it has disappointed me significantly. Smith's Anvil. Every 3 enemies killed, 2% resistance up to 50%. Resets every morning. We like resets every morning. And getting this on a Blood Mage or pretty much any hero that needs a little bit of tankability, you can pretty quickly get this up to, you know, like 20%. So by the end of the night, maybe you're getting up to 50%. I think this one is quite good. It's like A tier as far as defensive stats go. I think it's right under, I prefer thickness, but it's right in the same space as thickness as like another good source of reliability that is a decent amount. It's going to peak at the end of the night or in the middle end of the night when generally you need the resistance most. So you can get some early kills and then get a bit more tanky and be ready to go. Stoneheart Shield resets every turn, and it's for every 4 enemies killed, 6 block up to 30. I don't think they needed the up to 30 on this, if I'm being honest. As it stands right now, it's just basically like, this feels like a, if you take your foot off the gas, you die type of perk, where it's like, oh, we get 6 block, 6 block, 6 block. Great. We've got like a bunch of block. Let's say we get up to 30 because we killed 20 enemies. I think that's the math on that. And now we have 30 block. And that's, killing 20 enemies seems very reasonable. So maybe you can consider this a pretty reliable source of 30 block. I don't think we need a huge number of additional ways to get block. So I think I'll put it like up here in like top of B tier. I think it's okay without being kind of crazy. Fear of Death. Okay, so I think this has like a fundamental problem in its design. And basically the way that it works is whenever an enemy is hit, your crit goes up. Landing a crit resets the bonus. So it's basically just for a relatively low crit hero, you can farm up and get pretty reliable crit. You can get more crits than you would get otherwise. So if you don't want to invest in crit, this is decent. I think what would have made this super interesting is if they had made it so that when you hit, you gain crit power. And then when you eventually crit, it resets that crit power, because then it would have created this fun kind of like mid crit build where you like have 30% crit. So you're not critting too frequently. And when you crit, you get really big numbers out of it or something like that, which I think could have been fun. As it stands, this is good. I put it like around Glass Cannon as like a mid-tier way to like get some crits without having to invest in crit. I think it's okay in that regard. Moving on to aggressiveness. I don't understand how aggressiveness works. Like I genuinely, like I have tried a few times. And the first problem is if you have anything that increases your armor, it seems to erode this stat. So like if you have Heart of the Party and someone is adding armor to your hero, it kind of gets rid of the missing armor first, it seems. So it's kind of hard to figure out how to make this necessarily work. And 15 missing armor turning into just 3% damage for one turn. I would love to see someone max this at 60% damage. It feels very impressive because of the short-lived nature of it. With Blessing, maybe it starts to get a little better. I am open to someone opening my eyes about this, but for now, it feels like B tier, like in and around Spiky Counter kind of thing, where I don't know how to necessarily make it work. Next up is Collateral Damage, and Collateral Damage is a hard one because it breaks a lot of things. This needs some fixes. At the moment, Collateral Damage at time of release was truly terrible. It killed your own heroes and was just quite bad. Now it doesn't kill your own heroes anymore, but it still interrupts multi-hit and appears to also interrupt propagation. Both not great. I tried yesterday doing a miss build where I literally stacked a hero to like negative 27% accuracy, gave them inaccurate weapons like the Great Axe, and tried so hard to farm misses. And the issue is just the range. Range of 2 is not enough. This needs a bit more range because it is so hard to be standing near things to get collateral hit. When I read this, I assumed that it was within 2 tiles of the thing that you missed. It is not. It's within 2 tiles of you. So to that end, I think that I don't understand how this works at all. There's no such thing as an inaccuracy build. I think Collateral Damage is F tier. By the way, I was getting collateral hits for like 2,000. It was funny. I killed Nessie with a collateral hit, but that doesn't make it good. There's no build for this to synergize with. You can imagine it playing a little bit with Shower of Blows, which is going to force the occasional miss, but the heroes that are going to be doing that aren't going to be heroes that are standing next to stuff and knowing when it's going to trigger and making sure that you're always near something to trigger. It's too awkward to use right now. If the range went up, we'd be having maybe a different discussion. Don't move. Every 8 enemies hit, the next enemy gets undodgeable and -10 move. It's okay, like on multi-hit builds, it allows you, like with Hex, to maybe like immobilize some things for a while. You can potentially spread it with Contagion, which is kind of interesting. It's a very big minus move, but I haven't found myself really like craving it or wanting it. So I'm going to put it like here with Third Eye as like it's kind of nice. If it shows up and, you know, I don't have anything else on a multi-hit hero, I might grab it, but it's not moving the needle too terribly much for me. Earthquake Strike. Every 6 enemies hit, apply stun 100% to all adjacent enemies to you. Again, this is to you, so you have to be standing in the thick of things. Earthquake Strike can be triggered by Spiky Counter, which makes it a little hard to use on the kinds of enemies that I would generally want to be using it, but I don't know what hero this works on, I think is the problem, because it has to be a hero that's wading into the crowd, but also hitting a lot. And I don't really have like a multi-hit Blood Mage, multi-hit tanky build necessarily. It has some limited use in kind of like maybe like a War Shield build or something like that. But Earthquake Strike has been largely unimpressive to me, and I think lives in this like bottom of B tier. Like it's above Mood Swing. It's probably like around Explosive Hemoglobin, somewhere in that neck of the woods. Then we have Forge Mastery. First attack of the turn, 50% perk damage and 100% reliability. I actually kind of dig this. 100% if you're going to give me reliability, give me 100% reliability in a reliable manner where I know that it's going to show up all the time. 50% perk damage is nothing to sneeze at. On a multi-hit hero, that can be a lot of hits that are all benefiting from this perk damage. So I like this as like an Initiator type of thing. It's what I kind of wish Initiator looked like. And so as a result, I think I put it like somewhere down here, maybe like between Vivified and Flexibility. It's just a lot of perk damage. It can give you that really big first hit that can be quite nice. Then we have Condensed Hate. So every 8 times a hero is hit, the next attack gets undodgeable, armor pierce, and 200% stun. This can be cool on Hedgehog style builds. You know, you can really think of it on average as probably triggering about once every other turn, unless you have archers or something like that to make it every turn. But you toss this on like a multi-hit, or, you know, you toss it on like a triple swipe on a blood mage, those types of things. I haven't really found an amazing application for the stun because I feel like everything that you're hitting is generally going to die due to undodgeable and armor piercing. But the stun is interesting. Maybe you can hit a twisted with it and get a stun on them. But if they're immune to it, I don't know. Like, I need to figure it out. I can stun most things reliably. I've never found anything that 200% enables me to stun that I otherwise couldn't. Maybe bosses can be stunned at 200%. I think they all have infinite stun resist though. So I don't fully know what's going on here, but like it does fit into some builds interestingly. And of all of the metal ones, I think I'll put it up here with Bully. Like it's pretty decent. Then we have Like a Shark. When attacking a wounded enemy, attack gets 100% reliability and unblockable. Okay, so you already made the enemy wounded, which means you dealt with their block somehow. You got this far. And now, basically, it's just guaranteeing that you get the kill on said wounded enemy. I don't know. Like, I think it's C tier. I don't think I need 100% reliability or unblockable. If something really has that much block and I'm struggling to kill it, Like a Shark isn't going to help me get it to wounded. And once it's wounded, I've probably already done most of the work. So that's all of your medallions. Now let's finish strong. Just 3 more to go. Whew, this has been a marathon. We have Geo Reservoir. So this is the reworked version of Geo Reservoir, and it is such a clever perk. So as you may or may not know, the old version gave some damage, gave a variety of other things. The new version basically makes it so that you can reach out and blow up anyone anywhere on the map if you have a lot of skill range. So what it does is it finds a way to exceed your range cap. And it does that by taking your skill range and actually adding it to the range of the gauntlet's attacks. So what happens is when Geo Reservoir is active, you potentially gain as much as 27 skill range on your skills. And you can drop a large propagate attack on the other side of the map or something like that. You also get vision, so you can go around obstacles. It's really, really cool. It is not necessarily insanely powerful. Like it gets huge points with me for coolness factor. And as a result, like I put it somewhere like middle of A tier, like maybe over here by Overload. But I think it struggles with being like hugely impactful. The gauntlet is a difficult weapon to utilize effectively. And I think that Geo Reservoir is extremely novel, very fun, not build worthy. Like the propagation build that I imagine is still, we need a new weapon that has like the hand crossbow equivalent for propagation needs to appear. And then the gauntlet will be like a great secondary weapon to go with it. But right now there's not really a propagation build and the gauntlet kind of suffers from that. Perfect Guard. Whenever the hero is hit, the next War Shield skill gets 8% perk damage up to 80%, and then there's some reasons that it goes down a little bit, but it can go over cap. So you can have more perk damage banked than the 80, and it will subtract from that before dropping below 80%. This has just created new builds for us that we otherwise didn't have, and so I love Perfect Guard. I think it's insanely fun on Hedgehog Blood Mages. It gives you those big hits. The shield doesn't have great skills to spend the perk damage with, but you know, you can toss out like a Wall of Pain or something like that and blow up a lot of enemies with it. And then last but not least, we have Overheat. Wins the Tome Award, but the basic idea is as you spend mana and AP, you're going to overheat with the cannon, and then you're going to take health damage and also explode once you are overheating. It's cool. It enables builds like in and of itself, in the sense that The Fire Blast damage benefits from proximity shot. It can be really cool. You can do like a crit overheat build where you rocket jump, you hit 8 targets. If they survive, you hit 8 targets again. With the overheat of the landing, you can land in groups and then explode. There's a lot of interesting things that you can do with overheat. You can also use it to whittle down your Warcry heroes. So I like overheat. It is not in like the perfect guard category. So I think like it lives in a very similar place to Geo Reservoir, but like a little bit higher up. Like maybe we'll put it like up here with Warcry. They can hang out together. But yeah, I think it's an interesting skill. Holy cow. I feel like I think I've been going for 2 hours now. I am delirious. If you enjoyed this tier list, please let me know. There will be time codes for every single one of these perks, much to my chagrin and hopefully your joy. If you want to see more videos like this, please leave a like, leave a follow, let me know where you agree or disagree. As a reminder, keep it cordial. I am making impossible decisions here. If Leapfrog is too low in A tier, I understand how you feel that way, but I had to make some difficult decisions. I do this all on the fly. This is not pre-made and I'm like looking over here and trying to, get everything in the right place. I just do this based on my gut feelings, and the real value of this video is being able to talk through the pros and cons of each one of these perks. That dialogue is the value that we all get out of this. We all get to think critically about what is good, what is bad, have discussions about them, and generally ponder the benefits of each of these perks. If you have ones that you think were misplaced, you think that I'm totally missing the boat and Spiky Counter is way better than I think it is, let me know. I'm curious. If Spiky Counter worked with Boom, it would be an A tier, no problem. But right now it can only kill 4 enemies unless you get lucky with waves. I digress. So that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. As always, sub to the channel for more videos like this. Build guide is coming soon. And other than that, I'm going to go edit this video, send it out the door, and I will see you in the next one. Come hang out on stream too. We stream Tuesday through Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific. Be there, be square, but I'm out of here. Bye.